Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Culture Crush. Today on the show, we're talking about 3 community building lessons from human-centered marketing by its author, Ashley Faus. Ashley, it's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, you are like one of the busiest people I think I know, right? And it's been a pleasure getting to know you, and it's been a pleasure that you've created a bit of space for me in your busy universe over the last kind of 18 months. But what are you up to? Like, what are you trying to get done in the world? But what specifically is happening? Because it's very exciting.
Yeah, so specifically, I am in book launch mode. So for a fair portion of 2024, I was in book writing mode. And now I have actually transitioned into book launch mode. And then I did also recently announce I'm actually teaching a course based on the book with Stanford Continuing Studies this summer. So I am also in course building and course promotion mode. So lots of good stuff to kind of get these ideas out into the world in a variety of different formats.
I'm just curious. We didn't talk about, we don't want to go down this rabbit hole for too long, but I am curious, how did the book thing actually happen? Because there are lots of authors out there, right, who self-publish and they do that kind of thing. That's not what's happening here. Like, you are being published by someone else. So this is like real authorship. Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, so Kogan Page is my publisher. They actually reached out to me, I guess it was January, February timeframe in 2024. And they published Nancy Harhut's book. And her and I know each other. We've spoken in a number of the same conferences. She's an excellent speaker, excellent writer. She basically incorporates psychology into marketing. And so she talks about behavioral science and how to apply that from a marketing perspective. So, Kogan Page kind of found me in their research, went through some of my LinkedIn stuff and reached out and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, in fact, I have. I have a whole outline. Yes, I have thought of this. No, I have not published one yet. So they actually found me. And it was funny when I first sent over the outline, they were like, are you sure this isn't 3 books? And I was like, no. This is 1 book, not 3. So, but yeah, that's how it happened.
Well, I'm already excited about the sequel, so maybe there will be a book 2 or 3 in the trilogy. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
I was actually approached by, my cousin used to work in publishing. Well, I think he still does work in publishing, different kind of publishing now. And he approached me, must have been 20 years ago. And he said, we want to write a book called How to Be a Cool Christian.
There you go.
And basically I got as far as, I did write a chapter, and I think it was pitched in the US. But I think the US market probably found it a little bit offensive in the end. So they politely declined. So I once had a dalliance with the possibility of being an author, and it quickly died not even a few months later. So there you go. I'm not even close. I wrote a chapter and nothing happened. So there you go. Anyway, getting back to what we're talking about today. Before we dive into today's themes and subjects, I wanted to let everybody know like how this episode came about, because every episode of the Culture Crush podcast is curated by you, the audience. Ashley joined me for an episode of Culture Crush Live, a live event with about 20 people on the call, and Ashley takes us through some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, and then the audience reflects on that together. Like, we have this amazing group discussion, and it's those contributions, those ideas, those bits of feedback, those inspirations that go on to form these episodes. So if you want to join and co-create an episode with me and an expert one time, look out on LinkedIn or look out on social media, look at anthem.io, come and join us. It'd be great to see you. But if you didn't make this one and you're very upset that you didn't get some almost one-on-one time with Ashley, this is the opportunity to connect and do just that. And I'd like to invite you to consider 3 questions as we get into today's conversation. These questions are designed to help you step into that reflective mindset. If you missed the live, this is your opportunity to say, I'm in, I'm ready to rethink my approach to some of these marketing and community questions. Question number 1, think of a brand that you love. What is it that they do that helps you feel that sense of deeper connection? And question number 2, when have you felt truly seen by a group? What was it the group holders did or that the leaders do to help you feel that sense of connection, that sense of belonging? What do they do to help create that experience for you? And number 3, in your work, do you think deeper connections are losing ground to tech and efficiency and productivity? And what steps have you thought about taking, or are you taking, to address that balance? Now, Ashley, I've warned you that I was going to be asking some deeper, meaningful questions, but I'm wondering, which of those questions like resonated the most for you? Which of those feels the most poignant, I guess?
So funny enough, I think actually the middle one around group holders making you feel seen. And I'm actually going to pull from the rehearsal process that I'm in right now for a show called Brigadoon. It's a musical theater show, kind of a golden era musical. And I think that theater in general is a place where you naturally have to show up and be vulnerable and share and be willing to say and do things that maybe are outside of your normal life. And one interesting thing that our choreographer actually noticed, we were going through and we were running the show, and she was like, I noticed that none of you ever touch each other. Like, you don't put your arm around each other, you don't really hug, you don't go arm in arm, right? And this musical is set in like the late 1700s, and it's supposed to be this very tight-knit community. And she's like, why is no one touching each other? And there's actually a funeral in the show, and she's like, you're all standing there with your hands clasped, your arms crossed, like you all seem very sad, but nobody's actually like comforting each other. And so we kind of went through this whole exercise of realizing that like it's okay to put your arm around somebody, or to give somebody a hug or shake their hand, right? And I think that was something that was a really interesting moment, because we got to talking about, why don't we touch each other? And it's like, well, post-COVID, it's a little weird to touch people. And, especially in larger companies, we get a lot of training about, harassment and behaving professionally and those kinds of things. And we take all of that into our normal life. And especially as an American, all of us are in America in this show. America is not a very touchy-feely society. I think there's maybe other cultures where that's more accepted, but particularly in the US, we tend to be a bit more standoffish. And so it was just a really interesting observation. And she was like, you guys, whoever you are in your real life, you need to change that on stage, because the relationships between these people should include that sense of camaraderie and familiarity. So it was a really, really interesting observation, but, just plays into that whole space in theater of like, who are we? How do we relate to each other? How do we show those relationships beyond just what we're mimicking from a facial expression or a body posture standpoint?
It's a really interesting observation that the group holder literally said, I've noticed this behavior in this group. And rather than it being a you lot do this or don't do this, and that being kind of an accusatory stance, actually saying, I've noticed this, this is my perspective. Why do you think that is? And if people stop listening to this podcast episode right now, and I hope they don't, of course, but what a great takeaway, actually, to think, when you approach your relationships tomorrow, or when you approach your team tomorrow, or when you approach your co-workers tomorrow, don't be afraid to say, I've noticed this about how we interact. And feel free to, like, why do you think that is? Or am I misunderstanding? Like, it doesn't have to be confrontational at all, but it might change the dynamic in those relationships a bit. So, give that a go. And this is what I loved about our Culture Crush Live session, by the way, is that the questions that I've been asking, is they're inspired by the group, right? They come out of our conversation at Culture Crush Live. And it was such a fascinating conversation, but it really felt like we were just scratching the surface, right? Like we were just, we were seeing the tip of the iceberg poking out the surface of the water. And yes, the subtext here is very, very clear. You need to go and buy the book. It's out next Tuesday. You must go and do that. But what was really on everybody's mind was this sense that they were curious about, how do I connect more meaningfully with my group? We had people who were running podcasts, people who were community managers. The question was essentially the same, like, in the pace of all this, how am I going to connect more meaningfully with people? And that unlocked a really, really interesting insight from you, right? You had your kind of session plan mapped out and you knew what you were going to say, but you jumped straight in with some of these insights around Zoom fatigue and some research that you've seen recently. And I wanted to start there again because it was like such a, like, oh shit, like light bulb moment. Like, this is really, really fascinating. So tell us about that. Like, what have you discovered recently?
So Stanford actually has, I think it's called the Human Computer Interaction Institute or Lab, and they do look at how humans and technology engage with each other. And they put out some research, I think it was shortly after COVID, talking about this phenomenon of Zoom fatigue. And do we actually get more tired engaging via video? And the answer is yes. And there's some very specific reasons for that. So we all know that there's so much that happens that our brains process subconsciously, that we're not aware of it, but it's processing in the background. And the reality is it's actually much harder to process via video. And so you do have to work harder. Most of us are actually sitting much closer to each other. So from a screen perspective, like I wouldn't normally sit this close to you the way that it appears that I'm sitting on the video. You can't see the rest of my body. And so there's stuff kind of happening that maybe you can see a little bit of movement just off the screen or at the very bottom of the screen, or I talk with my hands and I try to be conscious of it, of making sure they're in the frame. But frequently, if I'm in meetings or if I'm sitting far back or too close to the screen, my hands are not fully in there. And so all you see is just like little bits of motion from my fingers popping up at the very edge of your screen. And so you're constantly having to be like, what is that? Is it a threat? It's not a threat. Is it something I should pay attention to? Should I mirror that? Is she angry? Is she excited? Is she right? All of that has to happen in the background makes it exhausting for your brain. And then frequently there's slight delays in the video and the audio. And so again, your brain is constantly like, something's just not quite right. And so your brain is then having to fill in and bridge those gaps. So Zoom fatigue is real. There's a reason that it happens. And there's a variety of both, like from a biology standpoint and a brain standpoint and a visual standpoint, that all of this happens. And I think that's something that's really interesting because particularly in the age of AI, again, prior to a lot of AI now being able to do image generation and video generation quite well, most of it was written. And so the sense that the way to build trust in the age of AI is to use more video, but it's actually quite fatiguing for people to process video. And especially if you're doing Zoom or something like that, right, where it is more real time. And so I think we've actually come to a place which brings us to this discussion of community. How do you build that at scale in writing with video or virtual events? And then where do you lean into the things that don't really scale, which is the in-person, truly face-to-face, flesh-to-flesh, like shaking hands, high five, give a hug, sit next to somebody, interactions, that's the real thing that humans continue to have that's unique, is being together in the exact same space. AI can't mimic that. AI can't fake that for you. Like that is something that is uniquely human. So I'll pause there because I know that's a lot and I'm kind of connecting the dots between the like Zoom fatigue and then the AI stuff and the community stuff, but I feel like it all definitely goes together.
It's really interesting because people like common phrase in marketing, right, is zig when everyone else is zagging or zag when everyone else is zigging. I'm not sure which way around it goes. But for the brands who are brave enough to harness what genuine community looks like and employ people who have genuine community building skill, they're really going to outlast the competition because that is the small, the focused, the local, the in-person, or like this ways, other ways that small groups might connect. Like that is going to become like brand gold, right? For brands who can do that well, that is the new zig when everyone else is zagging. Whilst everybody else is trying to put out like 50 LinkedIn messages a day, or, you know, or creating video avatars of themselves so they can just pump out scripts. Like the real grounded, like community-based stuff, that is going to stand out, right? So it's just such a really interesting conversation. And when I was reflecting on that point about Zoom fatigue, one of the things you mentioned as well is we're always asking the question now, like, did a computer write this? Like, did a robot put this together? Did a robot write this script? And so we have another layer of analysis on top of those fatiguing things that we're already facing. We have this other layer of analysis always happening as well. And for me, it really kind of highlighted the magnitude of this, what I'm calling a trust famine that we're experiencing at the moment. And we tend, and I do this as well, like we all do this, we tend to like look to like brands that we don't like, or brands we want to cancel, or politicians that we hate, or we tend to other and blame and say, this is the problem, this is the issue. And actually, we've been so conditioned to be productive. We've been so conditioned to think like your social presence doesn't matter if it doesn't get 1,000 views or 70,000 views on TikTok or whatever. We've been so conditioned to believe those things. Or, we hoard information now rather than like my bookshelf here, you can't see it, right? It's got about like 10 personal development books, right? Because I'm thinking one of those has the gold. The truth is they all have some gold. And it would be great if I just read one of them and really spent time applying those lessons. But I don't. I hoard information because I'm worried that I'm going to miss out on what's really, really important. So I'm hoarding all the time, new information, and I'm not reading any of it. So it doesn't make a difference. And so I'm applying all this stuff all the time. And our brains are just having to work so damn hard to try and make sense of it all the time. And it's those little things that are happening all the time. Yes, politicians might be bad. I'm not saying they're not. Yes, there are some evil brands out there. That's very, very true. But there's also these micro behaviors that we are all so drenched in as well that are causing our brains to work so freaking hard. So smaller, community, slower. I love it. And hopefully we're going to talk about how to actually do some of that stuff as we go through. And there are kind of three main points, right? We are going to change. I'm going to stop rambling. There are kind of three main things that we want to discuss, right? The social spectrum, build versus join, and content and value mix in community. Now, that's code until you reveal what on earth I'm talking about. But the social media spectrum, tell us about that.
We'll start there. So this is one of the frameworks that I talk about in the book. And on one end of the spectrum, we have what I call communicate, which is basically that broadcast mindset where the brand says, I've got something to say and I'm going to communicate it out to my followers. And in that case, what they want their followers to do is to amplify. They want them to make the message louder. They want them to shout about whatever the brand is talking about. And I think most brands today understand that you can't just hang out in that communicate and amplify end of the spectrum. People don't want to be shouted at. It gets annoying when people are constantly just like, look at me, look at me, look at me, and also tell everyone else about me. And so most of them realize that like you can't just hang out only in that communicate and amplify end of the spectrum. So a lot of them are actually, in my opinion, stuck in this conversation phase. And it's interesting because you think that it's better. Like, social media should be a two-way conversation. The problem is most brands only want that conversation to be about them. Like, I'm not just going to talk myself, but Dan, I need you to talk about me, right? And so in that case, they want people to be their advocates. They want their followers and employees to be their advocates. And you see this, it's inherent in the name, right? An employee amplification program or an employee advocacy program. And you can notice that you're in this phase with things like looking at only the comments on the brand LinkedIn page, or looking at how many people retweet or use the branded hashtag, how many people mention you in a conversation. And so you're constantly like, how do we get people to bring us into the conversation so that effectively we can talk about ourselves and sell our thing? Or we'll respond to comments, but only if they're on our brand page or only if they're in our owned forums and channels. So that's the conversation and advocate phase. What we really want to see, the most mature brands, those who actually can build the super fans and the champions and holding space and really have that multi-way relationship are the folks in the community phase. And in this case, they want their followers or, community members to be ambassadors. And so if I think about this like a party, right? If I'm hosting a party, it would be really weird if I gathered everyone to the apartment, gave them all snacks, and in the middle of all of them having great conversations with each other, I stood up and said, "I'm sorry, excuse me, I will now be speaking. Thank you." Like, that would be weird, right? But as a host, what I do is I may go around to the different groups. I may introduce people to others. I curate this group of people who will get along well. Maybe I give them some prompts or introductions to help them make connections. And then sure, I talk to the groups. Somebody else may say, "Oh my gosh, Ashley, you have to hear so-and-so's story," or "Ashley, you need to come over and talk about this. So-and-so just mentioned this. It's perfect. You guys need to talk," right? And so what brands really need to do in that community phase is hold the space, facilitate the conversations and connections around topics that are relevant. It's not just about the brand or just about the products or services. It's really holistically thinking about process, tools, knowledge components, systems, people, right? Practices. All of that goes together to truly make up that community. So I'll pause there because we've got communicate and amplify, we've got conversation and advocacy, and then we've got community and ambassadors. That's the social media spectrum.
So it's interesting. I was working as a brand strategy director for an AI company not so long ago. A company that was acquired, and I was subsequently made redundant with it, along with everybody else. Exciting time. But what's quite interesting is that the role of that company was using social media to listen, to really pay attention to the not obvious conversations that were going on within sub-communities, right? So if you were, we didn't work with Nike, but so to complete hypothetical, if Nike were to say, "We're interested in launching a new streetwear brand," we would look for signals about the real conversations that were happening, not demographics, right? Because you've seen that thing about, Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles sharing the same demographics, right? That's not very helpful. It was more like, what are the deeper signals that are going on in kind of subcultures at the moment? And then we'd come back with some proposals and say, look, these are the conversations that are really happening right now. It may seem like a total shot in the dark to you, but if you want to launch a new brand, you've got to try these things. And they're going to feel completely off the wall to you. But genuinely, this is what you've got to go and try. And so it's kind of fun. And it kind of speaks to that idea of like, what are the real conversations that are happening that a brand can join in with, not own, not control, but participate in? Because it would make sense, right, for a Nike to talk in the streetwear space. Like it fits. So, what are the new conversations that you can join in with? But I have a kind of a different question, right? That big brands is one thing. What about smaller time creators, right? Because when I started Anthem, I literally started like a little like club thing called Anthem Amplifiers, which is all about getting my friends to talk about my thing. Needless to say, it didn't get much uptake, right? Since then, I think I've done a decent job of building community, like genuine community in other ways. But I'm just wondering, like, if you're not kind of a bigger brand, how do you, and you've got to put food on the table, right? It's like, how are you going to start building your business? Where do those kind of small time founders start? Because they're going to really feel anxious to be in broadcast mode, right?
Yeah. The thing that's interesting is, and I agree with you, it is a very different situation if you're, financially struggling or you have significant financial pressure in the short term. In that case, I would actually say like it might not actually serve you as much to be so focused on the longer term building until you get on more solid financial footing. The only thing worse than not building community is trying to fake it and doing a bait and switch. The reality is we are not tricking anyone into buying anything. And so if you show up and say, "Hey, we see this on LinkedIn all the time, right? Hey, I'd love to just have a casual chat." About what? Well, about how my, product or service can help you solve whatever problem the product or service solves, right? Like, okay, you don't want to just have a casual chat with me. You want to sell me something. And my radar is pretty good for these things now, but especially earlier in my career and when I was, first getting started on LinkedIn, I couldn't spot those things. And the number of sales calls I ended up on where I was just like, are you kidding? How did I get here? And I could not extricate myself. And it breaks the trust. So I think there's two things. One, be honest with yourself about your intention. If your intention is to sell, be transparent about that. That does build trust, even if it doesn't necessarily result in a short-term revenue conversion. The second thing is to think holistically about the exchange of value. And I think it's unfortunate. Too many people think that the only exchange of value is for a company or a creator to sell, and that's the value they give. And then for the person that they are, selling to pay them in dollars. And that's the only exchange of value. That's not true. There could be a knowledge exchange. It could be a strategic partnership. It could be referrals. It could be a sparring partner, somebody to bounce ideas off of. It could be hiring you for a new job. It could be recommending you for a job to a friend, right? There are so many different ways to exchange value. And one of my favorite examples of this from my own life, there's an agency that I worked with years ago at this point. They do social media listening and research and management and that sort of thing. Now that I'm at Atlassian, we have an in-house team for that. So I don't need that agency. However, they've kept in touch. The owner of that agency occasionally comes to the Bay Area. They host dinners. They invite me to the dinners and I go. I have referred a number of smaller companies that could use their services to them. And I say, tell them Ashley sent you, right? So that's one way where it's worth it for them to keep that relationship with me because they stay top of mind and I refer business to them. And you might think like, oh, that's not a good exchange of value, right? Like Ashley's just referring things. But they actually had a client who was looking to hire somebody in-house. And so they came to me and said, hey, is there anybody in your network that you would recommend for this role? And a now former colleague of mine, they had left Atlassian, ended up having a layoff, and so they were looking for their next role. And so I made the introduction. That person ended up getting hired at this agency's client, right? And so I built that goodwill with my colleague to be able to say, this is a good place to work because they're working with this agency. You'll have support. The agency looks great because they were able to hire someone. And then obviously, I have served 2 people in my network by making that connection, right? So nowhere in there have I received direct compensation. I have not paid them any money in almost a decade at this point. And yet that relationship is mutually beneficial to both of us because they've introduced me to folks. I've introduced them to other people. I've referred people, right? So that is the kind of community mindset of looking at how you can help and make connections beyond just a transactional dollar exchange.
I think that's so crucial for so many people because we kind of, again, I mentioned it before, we've been so conditioned to think about reach and you've got to pump out loads of content and reach thousands of people and then you might have a cat and hell's chance of making it, right? I know that phrase actually works, right? It's like you haven't got a cat and hell's chance. A cat and hell's chance isn't a thing, Dan. It's the opposite. But you get my point that it's like we've been conditioned to think in that way. But the truth is, maybe if you could focus on, maybe start with 10 relationships. Think about where are the 10 relationships that you could have genuine conversations and say, hey, how could we help each other here? Like, where can we develop depth in our relationship? And it's not it might feel a bit uncomfortable at first to think in those terms, but that relationship is going to cost you some time and your time is valuable. So think about what is it that I'm looking for in this networking relationship and how can we help each other out? Focus on 10, right? What are those first 10 relationships? And then maybe think of the next 10. And I promise you, if you did that for a year, I am convinced that you might not have the most stable or you might not have made your wealth yet, right? But I promise you're going to have confidence that you're moving in the right direction. You're going to see green shoots. There is going to be some money. There are going to be some clients. And if there aren't by that point, it may be time to rethink your offer and think, oh, is the thing I'm trying to do really the thing that I should be doing? Because you would have developed enough depth in those relationships that the market will tell you, right? But I think forget the thousands, right? Forget about it. Forget about the reach. What do those 10 relationships look like? What do those 10 relationships look like? And what can you do with them? I just want to give a quick shout out here before we move on to build versus join, because Laura, who was on the call, she was really honest about kind of where she finds herself, that she sometimes talks about community, but when she really reflects on her work, is sometimes still stuck in that kind of more transactional marketing mode. But she kind of backs up my point, actually. She mentioned that she's been running these community events, and, you know, when she has a sellout, it feels great, right? Like it's a real good ego boost. And then when you get like 5 people, it can be like, oh, I feel gutted, like it's a real ego hit. But she made a really, really good point that actually, even though there was that initial disappointment that she didn't get the reach, actually those 5 conversations have ended up being so much more valuable to her in her work. And so again, if we were going to stop listening right now, people, maybe don't focus on the width, focus on that depth. Like, where can you build real deep relationships? Because then I'm going to unlock all sorts of things for you. But build versus join, point number 2, take it away.
So build versus join, this is a classic debate for any company that has decided, like, we're going to do community. I take issue with this idea of doing community, quote unquote. You don't quite do it. But if you are going to do it, you have to make the decision. Do you want to build your own community and start from scratch and really make it kind of about you and about the company and started from the company? Or do you join an existing community? And again, all of this goes back to, what are your goals? Who is the audience? You know, what is the unique gap or unique value that you can add? In a lot of cases, there are many industry conferences, right? And so if you are trying to reach a new segment or get insights for potentially a new audience, you don't really have credibility as a brand to say, all of you come to me, right? Let's say if you have traditionally been a brand that serves engineers, and now you decide you want to serve marketers. If everything in your content, your journeys, your products is primarily targeted at engineers, you don't suddenly have the ability to just be like, hey, marketers, come hang out with us. Everyone's like, why are you saying that to us, right? So in contrast, it might make sense for you to join a marketing industry community or space and start to show up in those conversations. So it really depends. Do you have the resources? Do you have the credibility? Is there a unique gap that you can fill? Or are there already very strong spaces, conversations? Is there already momentum elsewhere that you can join and support? So I actually talk about this in the book with Devin Bramhall when she was at Help Scout. And Help Scout basically faced this. They were like, do we build? Do we join? Right? And so they actually chose to join. And there was a whole community of support people. And so instead of saying, like, leave the space where you're already spending time and come over here and try to build net new relationships and net new content and net new rituals, they actually started supporting the existing community. So they had, swag and giveaways. They supported it with food and drinks and events. They supported it with content and awards, right? Like, they went all in to engage the audience in the space where they are already spending time. And I think that's another big thing, that if you're going to build a community, you're going to have to ask people to potentially change their habits, their watering holes, the spaces that they spend time in, and how they consume and exchange information. If there's nothing that already exists, that change is very small, right? It's like, hey, here's a new spot. Come hang out with us. But if there are already multiple spaces where these people are spending time, you're asking them to actively leave something that is working for them. And that's a hard sell. It doesn't really make sense. So again, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense to build. In some cases it does. It's easier to track. You have more control over the messaging. It's more associated with you as a brand. So there are a lot of benefits to building. But building just for the sake of having control starts to veer really far into the transactional, sales-driven pitching mindset instead of the community ambassador participation facilitation mindset. So I'll give that caveat that like have a very good reason if you're going to build, not just, well, I want it. Okay, what does your audience want and need?
Omer, who was on the call, he really cut to the quick, I think, on this subject, because he was asking about, as a technology expert, would he get more value from joining an existing community than and contributing really authentically in that space rather than trying to build his own? And I think with the monetization of communities, like I really hate that there's so many communities come with a price tag. It's not a community, it's a club, and it's fine that it's a club. It's like a gym, right? The business model is, I want you to pay your monthly subs, and then I don't care if you come or not, really. I just want you to keep paying. Like, let's just stop abusing the word community. Like that isn't a community. Like I say, that's a club, and that's fine. If you want to start a paid club, go for it, give it a go. But I think what Omer's trying to point, his question really was like, as a small business owner himself, it can be really tempting to like magpie after communities the way you've got to build now. But actually, probably get a lot more enjoyment and meet a lot more interesting people, start to build those deep relationships, those few deep relationships we mentioned before, right? I think that's got to be the direction for most people who are starting out.
Well, and I think that a lot of people don't understand what it takes, and we'll get into this with kind of the next point around the content mix and the value mix. It is hard to be a participant. I remember there was somebody years ago at Atlassian who wanted to start this like content series, event series, whatever. And this person was excellent at the relationship part, pretty terrible at the logistics and event hosting part. And so I was asked to speak at one of these events, and, I work at Atlassian, we're going to host it at the office. And so I show up to speak, and like, this person is nowhere to be found. So there's people like milling around outside the front of Atlassian, and they're like, where's the event? And I'm like, are there no signs that tell people where to go? And so I was like, oh, okay. So I went and printed signs so that people would know where to go, right? So they go, and I take these people and I'm like, here, let's get, you have to sign in. If you're going to come into the Atlassian offices, you have to register, right? It's from a security and safety standpoint. But there was nobody at the front desk to register them because it was an after hours event. And so there were no instructions. They had no idea what to do. And you can't get into any of the spaces if you don't have a badge or an escort. And so like, I'm like, not only there's no signs, there's no person, like the organizer. So I get these people, I've assigned somebody to the front desk, right? They get up there and like, there's food, but like, there's no plates, there's no silverware, there's just food. And I'm like, why? How are these people supposed to eat this food with no forks and knives, right? And it's not fun to make an event. Like the thing this person wanted was cool speakers and cool conversations. What they failed to understand is that in order for those two things to happen, you have to do everything else so that your community and your attendees get to have great speakers and cool conversations. Working an event, putting on an event, and participating at an event are two very different things. And people ask me this all the time, like with my, I bake cakes as a hobby, and everyone says, oh, are you going to start a bakery? Are you going to sell your cakes? And I'm like, I don't have any intentions of doing that at this point. If I wanted to run a business, like I run a business, it's my day job, right? Like I have a team and a salary and a budget and all of these things, right? Like I like to bake cakes, and everyone's like, oh yeah, then you could hire people to bake the cakes. No, that's the fun part. I don't want to do spreadsheets and manage a team in my hobby. That's what I do in my day job, right? And so I think it is, if you want to participate in community, that is a very different goal than facilitating community. It is a very specific job and set of skills. And it was just a little funny to kind of see that disconnect. And it happened a couple times. And you will not be surprised that ultimately that group and that series did not last beyond, the first couple of attempts, because the logistics, the budgeting, the, registration, the follow-up was just not there.
It goes back to that question we asked at the beginning. When have you felt truly seen by a group? Now, that kind of feels like a kind of a bit of a cosmic question, feels aloof in some respects, but because of the language that we sometimes use. But when I asked that, what did the group holders or leaders do to help create that experience? It's that stuff, right? It's not just about kind of setting the tone in the way that you present or using your body language to invite a certain response. It's actually the logistics. It's the stuff that goes with it that makes those kind of things possible. And when you were talking before about asking people to change their watering holes, right? You're saying, stop spending time over there, come and spend time here. There's some really great examples of how big brands can mess this up with games, right? You've seen some enormous, like AAA game releases, which cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And because what they've done is they've looked at the insights, right? They've looked at the data and they've gone, well, gamers like this, and this. So if we put those things into our game's going to be successful too, right? And it's like, but no, because yes, they might enjoy those things. If you give them a survey, they might say, this is really cool about the game. But what's really cool about the game is that their friends are there, right? And you've seen some spectacular, like I think Sony had a first party game which they binned within weeks, despite the fact that they just thought, no one's ever going to play this. Let's just, that 300 million or 400 million it cost, done, just write it off. So that's just a really great live example. If you want to look at communities gone wrong, gaming is a great place to investigate, to do a bit of research. But anyway, I'm aware that we are running out of road, Ashley, and you've got other places to be. So let's talk about content and value mix and community.
Yeah. So the big thing with this, to your point about having a club, if 90 or 95% of the content is the brand talking, you don't have a community. You have something else. It might be a sales pitch. It might be a product page. It might be a club, but like you don't actually have a community. So it really should be more like 70% is other people talking amongst themselves. Maybe the brand chimes in 10, 15% of the time or seeds questions, but true communities have self-sustaining moderators. They kind of take on their own rules that are unspoken, but you can figure them out. Like maybe they are put into the official, rules of the community, but you can start to see things get enforced because the community is self-sustaining. And then, yes, every so often, someone, maybe the brand, can say, hey, here's something that I'm selling, or here's an event that I'm hosting that has, more than a nominal fee to participate. It's more of a revenue generating thing. But it's the same thing too. If all of your community members just constantly pitch their services, if the whole place is just a sales pitch, it's not a community. So really thinking about sustained investment in a variety of different formats, primarily focused about topics, not products or services from either the brand or its members. So, core takeaways on this are sustained investment. The members talk more than the brands talk, and the bulk of the content is not focused on an exchange that is primarily about generating short-term revenue by either the brand or its members.
I think that is such an important lesson, right? Like making sure that when you're engaging with people, regardless of what level you're talking to them about, whether it's a sales opportunity or whether it's like someone you want to network with, or whether it's a community you want to build, like constantly be asking about them. Like make them the center of the story, because they're going to feel so valued and appreciated. And I'm not saying this to say like, and if you do that, you can then get stuff from them, right? Because that can always feel a little bit like we're saying this stuff in order to achieve a thing. Like practice the art of being genuinely interested. Like it will just be good for you, and it'll be good for your business and you'll be surprised at the opportunities that emerge because of that. Like, practice that as the art of curiosity, I suppose. And just, if we want to get busier, like if we want to think like, I need to be really, really good at productivity, right? You're going to find ways to be busy. Like, if you think I really want to be good at AI, you're going to find ways to lose yourself in an AI rabbit hole. If you want to be curious about people, it's the same thing. You've got to practice it, turn it into a skill, and you don't know where that's going to lead to. My friend who joined us for the call, he's launched a podcast recently called Define Play. His name's Michael Merzer. He's an excellent host, and it's an excellent podcast. But it's a really lovely concept because Define Play is all about hearing from a broad range of people to listen to how they define play. Like, how do people play their way to meaning? And I know that he's got one eye on how they launch kind of in-person community groups to experience like different suggestions from the community about like different ways to play, like different ways to have fun together. And what's great about it is like, it's pure community and insight driven from other people. Like, yes, there is a structure that the show provides, right? But the insights that are being poured in are from everybody else. I mean, I'm sure Michael also will share his opinions on it too. But that's a really great example of something that's going to at least be 70% community driven by other people. But he did ask one real interesting question about, which you shared a funny anecdote related to this, right? But he was curious about, his show is new. There are only a few episodes in. Like, at what point do you start introducing in-person stuff if you've got this kind of community energy?
I think it really depends, again, on your goals, on your resources, on who the people are and the kinds of conversations they're having. So that one, I know it's a very marketer answer to say it depends, but I think that, it is also helpful if people are like, oh my gosh, I'd love to meet up. Or, starting with casual coffees where you're going to be in person somewhere and just saying, hey, I'm going to be at this coffee shop for a couple hours. If anybody wants to come by and say hello, that's in the local area. That's an easy way to start without having to turn it into this whole logistical struggle that, a former colleague of mine had.
Mm-hmm. Now, we did have one final question lined up. However, I can feel the plane is already too close to the airport terminal, and I need to bring this thing into land and turn the engine off. But Ashley, it was so great to have you at Culture Crush Live, and it's been so great having this conversation with you today. Thank you for making so much time for me and the Culture Crush audience, and let's make sure that we speak again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a Culture First leader, be sure to visit anthem.000 and come and join us for the next Culture Crush Live. It would be great to see you there.